What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Fellas YouTube channel. My name is Tyler Plath, back at you with another edition of Waiver Wire Monday, and it is officially that time of year where waivers become the ultimate crapshoot because it is full of streakers and streamers and pretenders, and it becomes increasingly more difficult to find legitimate pieces for our lineups and rosters. But that's where we step in to help you out and tell you who those players are that can become legitimate assets for your team. So before I dive in, make sure you're subscribed and have that notification bell turned on, as you'll be notified whenever we post, but you'll also be notified whenever we go live on Sunday mornings before kickoff to answer any last-minute start-sit questions you may have and so many other questions. So again, make sure you are subscribed. And with that, we'll start off with Commanders wide receiver Jahan Dotson. It's been a rough year for us Jahan Dotson stands, but we may be seeing the comeback after his wide receiver 7 finish on Sunday. Over the last 2 weeks, Jahan Dotson is second in target share and air yard share on the Commanders, and Curtis Samuel left the game on Sunday with an injury, so it's possible that Dotson was getting more looks because there were less options vying for targets. But the real reason why you take a shot on a guy like Jahan Dotson is because what if what we saw on Sunday is a sign of things to come? With his talent, it's certainly possible, and the trade deadline is on Tuesday. Curtis Samuel is a name that has been floated around a lot. If he's moved, that's more opportunity for Jahan Dotson, and more opportunity is what he saw on Sunday, and he took full advantage of it. Speaking of more opportunity, though, that's what we saw from Quentin Johnston on Sunday Night Football. He was still the wide receiver 3 in routes ran on the Chargers, but he did see a season high in targets, receptions, and routes. Johnston really feels like another rookie playmaker who is going to have a great second half of the season. And I say that because we've seen the likes of Christian Watson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Javonte Williams, who didn't produce much in the first half of their rookie season and then flipped a switch and started producing in the second half of the season. You can classify Johnston as one of those low-risk, high-reward players because at this point, you're not risking anything to invest in him. Now, I'm not saying it's a guarantee that Quentin Johnston will produce, and again, we've only seen one game with substantial volume, but why not take the chance on a guy like Quentin Johnston because the reward could be something substantial. Let's talk about our only running back on our list real quick before some more wide receivers, and that running back is Royce Freeman. Now, this does come with the disclaimer that the shelf life for Royce Freeman is pretty short because the Rams have one more game before their bye week, and that's when Kyren Williams should be ready to go after their bye week. But I want to bring up Freeman because while Henderson has gotten most of the touches in this backfield, Freeman is still getting a decent amount of touches too. And it's split. It's a legitimate split when you look at snap counts. But between Henderson and Freeman, Freeman found the end zone on a 1-yard score in week 8. So goal line opportunities do not just go to one guy. And Freeman actually outsnapped and ran more routes than Darrell Henderson. So there's some receiving potential for Freeman as well. Again, the shelf life is short for Royce Freeman. But if you have Darrell Henderson, I'd consider adding Royce Freeman just in case something happens to Darrell Henderson in the scenario that, let's say, Henderson isn't elevated off the practice squad. Something like that. Have Royce Freeman ready on your bench just in case. All right, back to our wide receivers now with Bills wide receiver Khalil Shakir. And Shakir may be someone we see more of in this offense moving forward. Dawson Knox picked up an injury in week 7, and Shakir saw a season high in routes as a result of that. Following that game, Dawson Knox was put on IR, and in week 8, Khalil Shakir saw even more routes. So he topped his season high in week 8. That's a crystal clear sign that the Bills are using more 3 wide receiver sets than before, and because of that, we'll be seeing more of Khalil Shakir moving forward. In a loaded offense like Buffalo that has yet to fully hit their stride, we may be seeing some more performances like we saw in Week 8 from Khalil Shakir. So if you are looking at a low risk, dart throw, kind of waiver wire wide receiver ad, Khalil Shakir definitely gets that vote for us. Patriots wide receiver Demario Douglas is next, and yet another Patriots player to talk about on a waiver video. It's not exciting, especially when you look at this Patriots wide receiver room, because it is just straight up disgusting. But Douglas has some sneaky upside to him after week 8. You look at the other wide receivers in the Patriots wide receiver room. Tyquan Thornton was a healthy scratch in week 8. Devontae Parker left the game with a head injury, so there's potential that he misses an extended period of time. Kendrick Bourne tore his ACL in the fourth quarter, and he's done for the year now. Juju Smith-Schuster only came into the game after Kendrick Bourne left. The only constant, though, in that wide receiver room, Demario Douglas. Now, it was easy for him to lead the team in most metrics in the game, but he may be the guy moving forward, as he's now the leader in target share and air yards by a considerable margin when compared to any other Patriots wide receiver. Yes, Kendrick Bourne still leads in those categories, but he's done for the year. So the next guy up is Demario Douglas. And the last wide receiver we'll get to before some quarterbacks and tight ends is Rashid Shaheed, and he's a fascinating player. He has 2 top 12 wide receiver finishes in his last 3 games, but he also has 2 games with over 42.5 yards per reception in that stretch. Just some crazy numbers for you on this Monday afternoon. Anyways, Shaheed is borderline unpredictable, because he's behind Chris Olave and Michael Thomas on the depth chart, and Alvin Kamara's presence is taking away opportunities from him. So there's not much of an argument to be made here for Shaheed, other than he is the rare wide receiver handcuff that may be worth stashing in case something happens to Michael Thomas or Chris Olave, if either of them miss action for any reason. Again, if you have Michael Thomas or Chris Olave, it might be worth looking at Rashid Shaheed just as a handcuff, as a plan B in case something goes wrong with the starter. All right, on to our quarterbacks and tight ends now, and the first 2 guys are players that actually need to be rostered and need to be considered as starting options, at least for the next couple weeks. First is Cardinals tight end Trey McBride. We saw McBride's snap share grow from 48% to 51% from week 6 to 7, and Zach Ertz was placed on IR before week 8. So in his first game as the tight end 1 on the Arizona Cardinals, Trey McBride finished as the overall tight end 1 in fantasy football. He had 10 receptions on 14 targets for 95 yards and a touchdown. Before we saw the fall off of Zach Ertz was second on the Cardinals in target share, and that's a ton of work to be opened up for Trey McBride, and he took advantage of it in week 8. It's only been a week, but McBride might just be a top 10 play moving forward. And our first quarterback is Commanders quarterback Sam Howell, and while it hasn't been the prettiest, Sam Howell is now the quarterback 8 on the year after his QB1 finish in week 8. And the important takeaway for Howell is that over his last 4 games, he's had 3 finishes inside the top 10, and he's the quarterback 5 in points per game over that stretch. He's first in passing attempts, he's first in passing touchdowns, and he's second in passing yards as well. I think we're seeing a change in this Washington offense to be more pass happy, more pass heavy, and some of that may be because of game scripts and playing from behind, but Howell can produce in those scenarios because of the weapons that he has at his disposal. It's much different and much more difficult for a guy like Mac Jones or Bryce Young to produce in those scenarios because they just don't have the same quality of weapons that Sam Howell does in Washington. So because of that, it's probably time to start looking at Sam Howell as a low-end quarterback 1 option in the weeks ahead. All right, on to our streamers of the week, 1 quarterback and 1 tight end, with teams like the Lions, the 49ers, the Jaguars, all on bye in week 9. We'll need to find some options. So your quarterback option is Baker Mayfield, who takes on the Houston Texans. Baker has finished as a top 12 quarterback in 2 straight weeks, and Houston has allowed opposing quarterbacks to put up 19 fantasy points on average against them in their last 3 games. Baker can take advantage of this defense with guys like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin in our tight end stream is Taysom Hill. Just when you thought the names couldn't get any more uglier, here comes Taysom Hill. Somehow, some way, Taysom Hill has been the tight end 2 over the last 3 weeks, and he's got a great stretch of games to possibly continue the heater that he's on. He's got the Bears next week, and they're averaging 12 fantasy points allowed to tight ends over the last 4 weeks. And while Taysom Hill isn't used like a traditional tight end is, he's still getting it done, and with the matchups that he has, he could continue to do so. That'll do it for our 10 players to look for on waivers for week 9 in the 10 players that we discussed. Jahan Dotson, Quentin Johnston, Royce Freeman, Khalil Shakir, Demario Douglas, Rashid Shaheed, Trey McBride, Sam Howell, Baker Mayfield, and Taysom Hill. Thanks for tuning in. Again, make sure you're subscribed and give this video a like if you enjoyed this video. We'll be back tomorrow with an episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast, breaking down who is trending upwards and who is ending after week 8. You don't want to miss that. So we will see you on the next one.